Alrighty, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. My name is Nate. I also go by Hockey Boy Nate. We're going to be talking about what's happening in the Atlantic Basin with the tropics for the most part. We have Tropical Depression Fred, which is causing a tornado risk across most of the eastern United States. We also have Tropical Storm Henri, which is moving around Bermuda. And we also have Tropical Storm Grace, which is moving through Hispaniola, Jamaica, and Cuba at the moment. And so where these will end up heading, how strong will they be, and where will they impact? We will answer all those questions here in today's video. So before we get started, please be sure to leave a like on the video, subscribe if you're new, turn on notifications, share this with friends and family and on social media. Also follow me on social media, including my Twitch, link in the description down below. Let's go with Fred first off, because Fred is going to be creating the most impacts to the United States within a short period of time. Seems how Grace and Henri are relatively far off the coast there. We're going to be talking about this for the most part, and you can see these this general counterclockwise swirl with this and this huge outer band that's extending on the eastern side all the way down even as far south as the Great Bend of Florida and the Big Bend of Florida. And you can see that entire area of that flank is really creating a lot of showers and thunderstorms, and that's what's going to create your tornado risk for the most part here today. And we actually do have a tornado watch that has been issued out in Georgia at the moment, which will be in effect until 1 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. I am expecting them to issue another tornado watch out ahead of this whenever Fred does continue to move off towards the north and east, potentially towards Hickory, Greenville, even up into Greensboro, that general vicinity, even up into Bristol, Tennessee. So really got to watch out for that, for the potential tornado threat. Maybe even have a few widespread tornadoes within that general vicinity. Fred will be continuing to move off to the northeast. As of right now, it's moving north-northeast at 14 miles per hour. It is a tropical depression with 35-mile-per-hour winds and a minimum pressure of 1,004 millibars. And it is expected to become subtropical as it gets further north into the Appalachians, potentially into Kentucky and West Virginia. But the potential for tornadoes is still there, even along this entire threat. And we do have a 5% chance of tornadoes within a 25-mile radius here, within places of Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, and even areas near Bristol, Tennessee, as well as a 2% chance for tornadoes outlined in the green around it. So really need to watch out for that, as well as for tomorrow on Wednesday, the potential tornado threat could continue to exist here over portions of the mid-Atlantic, even into the Northeast, with places like West Virginia, Virginia, Maryland, Delaware, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and New York getting into the action as well. And the potential for an upgrade to a 5% chance for tornadoes is also possible with that. Taking a look at the North American model here, the 3-kilometer model off of that. If you want to take a look at the timings on the left-hand side right there, that's the time in Eastern Daylight Time. So luckily I don't have to do any conversions for you all, but by looking at the radar and seeing how it all progresses over time, the big huge threat for the most part is going to be from the morning all the way into the evening. It's an all-day event to which this could potentially create tornadoes, and you can already see some outer bands that are already being created by the North American model here by 8 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time, which is a little bit before me actually making this video. So if we were to align this with the current satellite imagery, I would say this is about correct. So we got some verification so far with this model, but then as we continue to progress it forwards, it loses a little bit of that band, except for the first one, which ends up becoming a bit more of a scattered storm threat. Not exactly all too much of a tornado threat there, but more of a scattered storm threat in that vicinity. And then you have a new band of storms that end up forming right around 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, maybe a little bit earlier at about 5 o'clock. You could potentially have some new strong bands that could be coming off from Fred, and that could create a huge tornado risk for some of these areas impacted. So northwestern portions of South Carolina, southwestern portions, or even western portions of North Carolina, even the eastern portions of Tennessee and northeastern portions of Georgia need to be on the lookout from this morning all the way into this evening, even overnight into tomorrow morning, even as this continues to propagate northward. And by midnight, you can see how scattered this threat actually is, even as it continues to move further and further towards Virginia and West Virginia. Then as it continues off until Wednesday, you can see how Fred tries to gain a little bit more of a better defined circulation even over land. You still have a couple of these outer bands here that try to create a decent tornado risk, but then unfortunately with this screen we're going to have to move to another area, and so we're going to go to the mid-Atlantic here, and you can see how those outer bands continue to be prevalent as this continues to move further and further towards the north and east, and you can even see how it extends all the way from the Mason-Dixon line all the way down towards the border of Virginia and North Carolina. So this is a quite widespread risk here, heading off into the afternoon hours and even to the evening hours. By around 4 p.m., you can see how widespread this risk is with a bunch of scattered showers and thunderstorms, and you could potentially see some tornadoes within that risk as well. Even into the late evening hours, you can see how it really becomes consolidated, and that's going to be a huge risk for tornadoes, especially with it being the closest to the vortex. Any showers and thunderstorms that typically fire off closer and closer towards the center area of low pressure, towards the center area of the vortex of Fred, you will potentially see a higher chance of seeing tornadoes within those lines. Not a guaranteed chance, but a higher chance of seeing tornadoes within that line. Now let's go ahead and shift off to Grace here. Grace has recently been upgraded to a tropical storm as of late. It is now a 45-mile-per-hour tropical storm with 1,005 millibars, moving west at 16 miles per hour. So not as slowly as Fred, but still propagating itself westward. Jamaica right here, Hispaniola in this general vicinity, Cuba right here, and then the southern peninsula of Florida right within here. Also to keep in mind that the Yucatan Peninsula and Cozumel, as well as Cancun, is over on the left part of your screen. You can see how this has been continuously gathering more and more showers and thunderstorms towards the center area of low pressure and becoming a lot more better organized while doing so. You can see the general swirl and the suction motion from this tropical system. Notice how most of these lines on the outside of the storm are actually heading inwards, but then if you look above all of those lines at the surface, these little kind of hazy clouds towards the top, you can see how it actually has been propagating with a decent anticyclonic flow for the most part. And so this tells you that this is a intensifying tropical system and that we could potentially be seeing a stronger storm as it continues to move westward. Taking a look at the water vapor imagery here, a bit of a zoomed out area, you can be able to determine that here is Grace at the center part of your screen. You have some very strong wind shear north of this, with this ridge that's occurring towards the north of it. You have a little bit of a troughing action right within here as well that should potentially keep Grace a bit more towards the west, not moving all too far north, and that could potentially be impacting areas near the Cayman Islands by the end of tonight into tomorrow morning. And so people over there need to watch out as well. I know I have a couple viewers who are from over there, so please hunker down, please stay safe, please go to higher ground if you potentially can. You also have a ridge that's a bit closer towards the United States. You can already see the clockwise formation within the clouds right within here. That's also going to keep Grace and steered a bit further towards the west. This wind shear is basically going to apply a lot of pressure to prohibit it from continuing to move further north, and it will kind of steer it a bit more towards the west. It'll kind of curl from a northern pattern to more of a western pattern as it continues to move on through. Taking a look at the cone of uncertainty here from the National Hurricane Center, you can see tropical storm warnings have already been issued for southern portions of Cuba, much of Jamaica, if not all of Jamaica, and the Cayman Islands. Tropical storm watches still extend for Haiti, parts of Dominican Republic, and even the northern portions of the south shore of Cuba. You also have a hurricane watch that has been issued for Cancun and Cozumel, as well as the Yucatan Peninsula. That's going to be really interesting to see if this thing can intensify further and further into a hurricane. Much of the models do say that this thing could potentially do so right before it makes landfall over there, and even if it doesn't, there is the potential for it to potentially do so over here in the Bay of Campeche. I personally think that it could become a hurricane. I actually have a high confidence that at some point in this lifespan, it will become a hurricane. Whether or not it'll be a hurricane prior to landfall here in the Yucatan Peninsula, or will it be a hurricane here in the Bay of Campeche, that is still yet to be determined. But it's still one of those things to where we have to continue to watch out, and that's the reason why there are hurricane watches in place for this system. There is aircraft reconnaissance going into this storm at the moment. We have had a lot of activity as of late with what all has been happening with the aircraft reconnaissance missions. We have had consistent winds at the surface here of about 40 to 45 knots, which would make this at a 45 to 50 mile per hour storm. But the conservative way to basically designate the intensity of the maximum sustained winds of Grace is to find what is most consistent and stick with it for the most part. And so that's the reason why we do have 45 mile per hour winds as the maximum sustained wind as of right now. But this thing is indeed intensifying more and more as we continue to watch out for this. And there's actually been some instances on this other NOAA reconnaissance plane to where we've had some pretty decent winds, even above that in some areas. Could be a bit of contamination in some areas, so maybe the data could be a little bit more inconsistent in some spots. But the really interesting, to say the least, is that Grace is intensifying as it continues to move westward. Taking a look at the models here, the general vorticity, all the shaded areas is the vorticity that is potential in the atmosphere. Of course, once it starts to get a bit more red, that's when you know you have a tropical cyclone on your hands, or at least a potential tropical cyclone on your hands. Looking at Fred, you can see that is a good example of it. Looking at Henri, it's not exactly the best example of it, but there's still that up there near Bermuda. Here's Grace, and you can see it has a bit of vorticity with it as well. And as it continues to move on towards the west here, you can see how it starts to consolidate more and more, and that's the concern there as to whether or not it continue to intensify rapidly within this short period of time once it gets towards Cancun. The big thing here that is keeping this is indeed the strong wind shear from this upper level trough right here, and you could see the counter, or the clockwise spin within this not trough, this ridge right here. And here's the trough that I was talking about earlier, I should say. And so you have your ridge that's creating a lot of wind shear, pushing Grace within this one place. You have the trough right under that that's kind of holding it from not moving over Cuba. And so the general position of Grace should continue to stay right within here, unless if the wind shear in the Gulf of Mexico, as soon as it gets over there, starts to weaken. But the thing that I've noticed from the models here, from the GFS model specifically, is that the wind shear has not weakened. It is actually strengthened by a couple of knots. And so I'm expecting this to continue to stay a bit further on the southern side of the Gulf of Mexico. Now, of course, models can change within the next few days. As a matter of fact, landfall again here in Cancun is expected to be on Wednesday evening into Thursday morning. And so things could definitely change between now and then. This is Tuesday morning when we are making this video. But still, regardless, the high likelihood is for this thing to continue to stay on the southern side of the Gulf of Mexico and not really impact the United States as big as we thought at first. As this continues to move on through, you can even see the wind shear here in the Gulf of Mexico start to intensify further and further as this upper level ridge does move a bit further into the northern portions of the Gulf of Mexico, into the southeastern states towards the deep south. And that will basically keep Grace in check for the most part as to whether it can move north or not. For this instance now, it will not really impact the intensity of this storm due to the fact that once it does intensify further and further, most likely into a high-end tropical storm and a low-end hurricane, maybe even a mid-end hurricane, then the wind shear won't really enact a whole lot of displacement with the thunderstorms due to the fact that it is already well defined and it's already got a a very good structure to prohibit that action. So it will potentially gradually weaken unless if there is a huge amount of energy in the Gulf of Mexico, which that does indeed be the case here in this instance, that there is a plethora amount of unstable marine energy. Now let's shift to the final storm here. This is Tropical Storm Henri, south and east of Bermuda. You can see here's Bermuda, here's the eastern coast of the United States on the top left-hand part of your screen. You can see that this thing continues to have a very impressive swirl with it. You can see all of these smaller clouds that are starting to kind of wrap into the cell within Henri, and that is a really it's been more defined than any other storm besides Fred in its late stages making landfall. And that says a whole lot because this is not even impacting land and it just formed over the past couple of days. So this thing has definitely been impressive to watch for the most part as it continues to try and avoid Bermuda for the most part. It's got a lot of very strong northerly shear that's enacting on the system. And if we take a look at the water vapor imagery, hopefully as this thing continues to load and load, we'll be able to show you that it's not exactly enacting a lot of wind shear right now, but in the next few days, we'll have to see as to whether or not the wind shear can actually push these showers and thunderstorms. But the one thing that I've noticed is that the low-level circulation and the mid-level circulation has been relatively organized. It hasn't been tilted a whole lot on this system, and so I'm expecting this to continue to intensify further and further. Whether or not this can become a hurricane, well, the models are a bit all over the place, but it's possible for this thing to become a hurricane as this continues to move on through. The National Hurricane Center has their cone of uncertainty, taking it a bit far off the coast of the United States, but it's still close enough to where Bermuda could potentially be impacted with some outer bands and a huge swell, so rip current risk could be possible across much of the United States East Coast here, as well as Bermuda. Nothing's expected to become a hurricane from this here right now, but there is a couple interesting things that I do want to point out on the models. We're going to take a look at the relative humidity at the mid-levels here. The lower-level circulation is the contours, and the mid-level to upper-level circulation would be the middle of this green here. And you can see that it's not very far apart from each other. And as this continues to progress, there's not a whole lot of wind shear now, but that ridge does creating some very strong wind shear, similar to what's happening with Grace. And unlike what's happening with Grace, to where the wind shear is just north of it, with Henri, the wind shear actually goes right over Grace. And so this potentially could displace some of the thunderstorms that Henri continues to try and produce, and whether or not that displaces the center more and more is the big question here. But another thing to point out is that this is around the time in which Fred's outer bands are going to be leaving the coast, and you could potentially have another severe weather event that tries to move on through here in the eastern portions of the United States. And so that sudden jolt of energy and moisture within this area could potentially leave this system with a higher intensity than it already did have. And so by the end of this week into the beginning of next week, we could potentially be talking about a system that could either A, baroclinically deepen, or B, intensify further due to the fact that there is an enhanced area of rich moisture coming into this general vicinity. The only issue with this, though, is that we do have a high pressure system, a big ridge that's on the southeastern side of this, enacting a lot of southerly shear, and that's the reason why Henri will head off to the north and not exactly to the north and west. And so it'll basically curl out a bit more, move a bit due north, but it will curl out to parallel the United States coast. And so if we take a look at that a little bit closer here, you can see how the system propagates further northward, gets very close towards areas near Cape Cod, and eventually heads off towards Nova Scotia. Very close, though. You can see some outer bands that could actually reach areas near Cape Cod and even near Maine and the New England portions of the United States. So really interesting to see how this continues to progress. As I said, the intensity guidance is all over the place. We have a lot of the models that say it will be a high-end tropical storm for the most part within the next 3 to 4 days. But then after that, the general ceiling here is high-end tropical storm, low-end hurricane here. And there's also been about 3 or 4 models that have said that this could potentially be higher than a Category 1 hurricane. So we'll definitely have to watch out for that, especially with how large it could potentially be as it curls off towards the north and east, and whether or not that could create some impacts for New England. That's going to be it from me, guys. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you guys did enjoy the video, please be sure to leave a like, subscribe if you're new, turn on notifications, share this with friends and family and on social media. I will not be doing a tropical update at 8 o'clock tonight. I have my Zoom call for my other job, but I will be doing a tropical update tomorrow evening at 8 o'clock, and I will be uploading another video tomorrow morning. So if you guys stay tuned for that, turn on notifications, that would be greatly appreciated to stay up to date with all of my content. That's it for me, and I'll talk to you guys tomorrow. Peace out, everyone.